With so many tight races, both Republican and Democratic candidates are courting the ever-elusive youth and millennial vote for victory. We want to talk about that. Joining us now, Alexander Wilkes, the executive director at America Rising, and Kevin Walling, the senior vice president at Hamburger Gibson Creative, to discuss this midterm election and whether candidates have been able to court millennials and young voters. A very big deal for both sides. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks so much for having us, Laura.
All right, Kevin, I want to start with you. The way millennials have been, talking and tweeting about getting out the vote and making a difference has been very interesting to watch during this election cycle. Young voters traditionally sit out midterms, but this time it seems like it could be different. How do you think it's going to go Tuesday?
Yeah, Laura, you're absolutely correct. And I couldn't be more excited to be talking about this with Alexandra and you today. In 2014, only 20% of millennial voters age 18 to 35 turned out in a midterm election. Right now, in the early voting that we're seeing in states like Texas, where it's up 500% from 2014, in Tennessee, where it's up over 700% in the early vote among millennial voters, I think there's really great news in terms of young people getting engaged, and it's across the board. It's not just Democrats turning out. Republicans are leading the early vote in a tight state like Florida, where you have two marquee races in terms of the governor and the Senate. So I think voters on both sides, young people on both sides, are really engaging in this election, and that's something to be celebrated and encouraged.
Look, it does definitely sound exciting. And Alexander, despite the get out the vote messaging, recent polls show that less than 1/3 of 18 to 34-year-olds surveyed say they will definitely vote. Over 50% said they aren't familiar with the congressional candidates in their district. And there's a lot of different polls out there. But is there a way this millennial momentum can be, fine-tuned to get them going?
Well, look, I think that, it's important to put some of these early voting numbers in context because, of course, while millennials are voting in greater proportion compared to the proportion that they voted in 2014, early voting is, of course, more popular than it was in 2014. It's an older sort of concept. And we also know that millennials are still being outpaced by their older counterparts. So, I don't know if we're going to exactly know how those numbers shake out come Election Day, particularly because millennials, unlike older voters, are more likely to be undecided or sort of independent with no party affiliation than older voters are. So it's more difficult, I think, to predict where it's going to come down. But I think that, for Republicans, the strongest argument we can make to young people is the strong job economy that's out there right now. This is a generation that grew up during, tough times. We saw our parents lose their jobs, their pensions in some cases. We've dealt with record unemployment for the last decade or so. And now that's starting to finally turn around. So I think that, Republicans do have a strong argument to make with young people in these closing days of the election.
Kevin, I want to show our audience some numbers because we've been talking about them. We know that turnout isn't always great in midterms, but you can see in the last midterm in 2014, 11.6 million 18 to 24-year-olds reported themselves as registered, but only 4.7 million voted. In 2010, same pattern, 12 million registered, only 5.6 million voted. General election turnout was strong in 2016 and in 2008. So what needs to happen to get these millennial midterm turnout numbers up? Because when we look at it and you see that the millennials are definitely energized, right?
Yeah, I mean, Laura, that's a great question, and that's that 20% figure I referenced before in terms of the number of voters in 2014 turning out. So I think, in Tennessee, for example, like I said, you've seen a 700% increase from the 14 numbers to the 18 numbers now. I think maybe that's, the Taylor Swift bump that we saw with her encouraging young folks to turn out, to register, to get engaged and to turn out for Phil Bredesen, who's running in a tight race against Marsha Blackburn. So again, I think the more that we can encourage young people to turn out, speak to their issues. Alexandra's right. We've got a strong economy, but that's not the only issue that affects young people. Obviously, college affordability, college debt, health care, protecting pre-existing conditions. When the Republicans, we know if they retain power, want to take that away from young people making decisions about their parents' health care and their coverage as they get older. Our parents who are baby boomers and they get older and have to engage more in the health care system.
Okay.
So so we want to make sure we're providing those protections for young people making those decisions.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you very much for sharing your perspective on this. Obviously, this is a big one to watch. We'll see how they do on Tuesday. Kevin Walling, Alexander Wilkes, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks for having us.
All right.